Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre a la app para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
With the election of Donald Trump, staying informed is more important than ever, and we're thankful you've chosen to listen to the DSR Network. Through the turbulent times ahead, we will continue to provide the insightful expert analysis on the issues that matter most around the world. We ask that you consider becoming a member to support our effort to provide you the best content possible. DSR members gain access to an ad-free listening experience, exclusive members-only segments of our shows, our members-only Discord community, and more. Use code HOLIDAY25 to get 50% off of your membership subscription at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code HOLIDAY25 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. The DSR Network will evolve in exciting ways in the new year, and we hope you'll join us.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week we learned that Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito spoke privately with Donald Trump to recommend a former law clerk for a job in Trump's government. Jamie Raskin tore into this news, urging Alito to recuse himself from matters involving Trump. And as it happens, Trump just asked the High Court to block a New York judge from issuing a sentencing for Trump's hush money conviction. What Raskin got right is to really zero in on the corruption embedded in Trump's relationship with the Supreme Court. After all, between this and another big piece of news, Judge Eileen Cannon ordering special counsel Jack Smith not to release his report on the evidence he's collected against Trump, the courts are really facing a crisis with regard to the president-elect. Today we're trying to make sense of all this with Politico's Kyle Cheney, one of the best reporters out there on all these topics. Kyle, thanks for coming back on, man.
Good to be with you, Greg. Always.
So let's start with Alito. He put out a statement confirming that one of his law clerks asked him to take a call from Trump, and he agreed. So they had the conversation. Of course, now Trump is asking the Supreme Court to block Judge Juan Merchan from sentencing him in the hush money case. This seems like pretty bad timing, doesn't it, Kyle? What do you make the substance of all this?
It does. And I mean, Donald Trump is acutely aware of what his lawyers are arguing on his behalf as he attempts to block this sentencing. And so it couldn't have come as a surprise to him that in the same moment he's having this phone call with Justice Alito, his lawyers are asking the Supreme Court to do this. And so yeah, it creates an appearance problem. And it just, creates this, again, at a moment where the court is dealing with its own legitimacy issues, to now have this front and center as they make this politically explosive decision can't be good for the institution either.
By the time people listen to this, the Supreme Court may have ruled on whether Juan Merchan can proceed with the sentencing, right?
Yeah, the decision is imminent, and the sentencing is scheduled for Friday, and so there's not much time for them to deal with it. And I think that again, I'd be surprised if they really step in and try to stop this thing. But we've been surprised by a lot of what the court's done over the last few months.
Well, whatever happens there, and again, by the time people listen to this, they may know, what Representative Jamie Raskin said actually holds. I'm going to read from what Raskin said about this. Quote, The mere act of having a personal telephone conversation with the president-elect, while he has active interests in matters currently pending before the court, is plainly sufficient to trigger a situation in which the justice's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. And crucially, Raskin added that Alito just brushed this off, even though it's a clear breach of judicial ethics. And Raskin noted that it's especially problematic when paired with Alito's, quote, troubling past partisan ideological activity in favor of Trump. Raskin is really calling into question the whole arrangement between the court and Trump here, isn't he, Kyle?
He is, and I think he made a reference to Alito and his wife having the flag that was associated with January 6th on in their house. At the same time, he's now known he's weighing matters related to the attack on the Capitol. And at the same time, Alito is smart enough to know this creates an appearance problem to take a call from President Trump. So whether there was anything, there's any sort of nefarious arrangement here or not, Alito knows exactly how this is going to look. When he gets that call, they say President-elect Trump is calling you. Sure, it's hard to turn down a call from the president, but when he's asking for a favor, essentially, for a former clerk, you have to know that no matter how that turns out, whatever he rules is going to now be called into question because of that personal dynamic between the two of them.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because what's really striking here is the audacity of it. I mean, let's go through the larger context. First, the Supreme Court said Trump could run for president despite the insurrection attempt. Then the Supreme Court helped Trump delay Jack Smith's January 6th prosecution so the trial didn't happen before the election, which arguably helped Trump win. The Supreme Court also granted Trump partial immunity from prosecution. And now Alito just hops on the phone with Trump to recommend someone for a job in the new administration. I mean, Kyle, do the Supreme Court justices worry about what all this looks like or not?
I mean, you would think so, but then Justice Alito hopped on the phone with President-elect Trump, and look, I think it does feed this perception that behind closed doors, these people are in this clubby atmosphere that everyone's talking to everyone and slapping each other on the back. And I think Trump has actually lampooned that entire culture in part of his political rise. And yet, having these kind of conversations with these well-connected people, again, who are making decisions, these are not just decisions that affect Donald Trump's administration, but Donald Trump's own personal livelihood and his something that's clearly very important to him, which is whether he's adjudicated a convicted felon or not. So there's, again, it has to be an awareness of that. It's just surprising, or as you say, maybe just the lack of caring is the surprising part in all this.
That is exactly it, Kyle. I mean, they just don't seem to care, and that's what's so surprising. On to Jack Smith. Judge Eileen Cannon temporarily blocked him from releasing his report. Can you walk us through where that is now? Smith has appealed this. What's Smith's argument, and what's the timeline? How does it all unfold now?
Sure. So the Justice Department has taken this to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to basically say we need immediate relief from Judge Cannon's order. Number one, I think they would doubt that she even has jurisdiction in the case because she dismissed the case back in July, and the Justice Department had already appealed that decision to the 11th Circuit, which means Judge Cannon may not have much of a role at all right now. So the fact that she issued an order that purported to stop Attorney General Garland from doing this, not just the part of the case that she oversaw, but also the 2020 election subversion case that was in Washington, D.C. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions about the Cannon order in the first place, and now the 11th Circuit has to decide pretty quickly whether they're going to toss that order or do something else.
Right. And so what you're referring to there when you say that Judge Cannon blocked release of the report concerning what she oversaw, you're talking about the prosecution for the stolen state secrets. So let me ask you, what do you think that might hold, that report? How damning do you think the information about the state secret prosecution could be?
Sure. I mean, look, I'll be honest. I've had low expectations for these reports because so much has come out in court filings and in the indictments themselves that I was confident until Donald Trump moved, heaven and earth to stop it from coming out. Because I looked, by the way, we should say Donald Trump has reviewed both of these reports
Yes.
for the last few days. He was given permission by the Justice Department to do that. And so he knows what's in there. And the fact that he is now coming out and fighting tooth and nail to stop them from becoming public. Now, he may just do that because he fights everything at all times when it comes to these investigations, but it is now creating at least this perception that maybe there really is something new in there. And in fact, in one of his filings, he does say there is new and unreleased information in there. How significant that is, we just don't know.
Attorney General Merrick Garland will release Jack Smith's report on the January 6th prosecution. What do you expect to be in there? I think the last time we talked about this, we thought that there was going to be some really damaging information in this prosecution. How damning do you expect this report to be?
I mean, I'm the first thing I'm going to do is compare this to what's already come out, and I'm hopeful to see more details called from the grand jury side of the investigation. The interviews they've done with Vice President Pence and former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Things that I really look for in some of the last minute filings that they issued in October on this as well. But a lot of that had to be redacted because the case was ongoing. I'm sure there were a lot of details they didn't include because they weren't germane to the specific arguments they were having at the time. And again, may have been protected by grand jury interests that now no longer really hold. A lot of times those things are still difficult to release. They're still sealed. But the Justice Department certainly has different interests now that the case has been dismissed against Trump there.
Well, I think the larger context is worth looking at here. Again, with regard to January 6th, Donald Trump, once he becomes president, is going to undertake a pretty concerted effort to entirely erase the truth about what happened and kind of replace it with a big historical lie. For instance, he's going to pardon, I guess we don't really know exactly which ones, but he's going to pardon at least some of the January 6th rioters. He talks about them as patriots and heroes and political prisoners and hostages. He has succeeded in nullifying the prosecution of himself for January 6th. So in a sense, you can kind of see why he is fighting the release of Jack Smith's report on January 6th as well. It really could interfere with his effort to rewrite the whole story, right?
Yeah, I think that's honestly the larger plot or subplot of this entire thing is there's Donald Trump who's coming into office with a clear intent to redefine, recast this revisionist version of what happened on January 6th and his role in it versus all these other forces, political adversaries, and also the Justice Department in trying to ensure that the truth of that day, what really happened, how bad and dangerous January 6th alone itself was, not to mention the several-month effort Donald Trump undertook to subvert the election, that doesn't get lost in that effort, that clearly political effort to tell a different story.
Right. And I think the big picture here is that the truth is going to come out with regard to the state secrets being stolen and with regard to the full story of the insurrection. We're just going to spend the next few years really battling it out over what those facts mean and whether Trump can successfully erase them, right?
Right, exactly. And I think, you even see it now. It's been 4 years since January 6th, and a lot of the visceral memories of it have faded to a degree. And there's those of us who have really followed it closely every day, and it's hard to forget, how dangerous and harrowing all of that was, especially when you're in court all the time, seeing the video of it and hearing the testimony about it. But for other people, it's easier to have it get muddier, especially when the person with the most powerful megaphone in the world is trying to tell a different version of events.
Yeah, well, he's certainly going to be using that megaphone. Just to bring this back to Raskin, he really hit the mark on the big picture here with the legitimacy of the whole arrangement between the high court and Trump being in doubt. There's a big role here for Democrats to really articulate that argument going forward, isn't there? And I know you write about this stuff sometimes as well, especially with Trump's policies likely to go before the court. This doesn't all end now. The Supreme Court's going to have to rule on some major things going forward, right? And so for Democrats to really try and push the court to have to kind of reckon with the role it's played in the Trump era is kind of essential to maybe getting them to be a little more impartial.
Yeah, and look, I think Democrats are going to have a difficult time. But I mean, look, they're going to be in the minority across Washington, and that's a very difficult place to be in. However, their eyes are fully trained on 2026 and taking back at least one chamber of Congress in the midterms, and this could be a piece of maybe a big piece of their message about some of the corruption that apparently in the swamp that Trump has always said he wants to eliminate. Maybe being a piece of his own governance in Washington. And I think Democrats did that somewhat effectively going into 2020, which was part of Joe Biden's campaign there. And of course, you've had COVID and a lot of other things. But now, you have this sort of Trump unbounded, not running for re-election, and trying to exert his full power in a way he didn't in his first term. And I think Democrats can see you be a foil for that.
The courts are going to be even arguably more important, given that Trump is going to really press very hard on the boundaries of presidential power, right? What do you see as the fault lines?
Sure. I mean, I think the way Trump wields executive power in general is going to be a big story of his second term, and whether the courts can restrain some of that if he crosses certain lines. I think the way he wields the pardon authority is going to be very fascinating, including whether he uses it to assure people that if they break the law doing things that he asks them to do, that they'll be protected. For example, do the courts have a role in constraining that somehow? Can they constrain that? To me, that's the number one sort of area I'll look at, because he's going to use that pardon authority pretty much on day one.
Yeah, and I think Raskin articulating that case and other Democrats articulating the case against the Supreme Court as essentially being in Trump's pocket is going to be kind of critical going forward for public understanding of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think that you'll hear that. I mean, look, Trump engineered this sort of 6-3 majority that I don't think he fully benefited from in his first term. But now he gets that 6-3 majority, probably hopes to build on it if he can get other retirements in his second term. But yeah, I think that may be a more potent argument for Democrats this time around, because he comes into office with this 6-3 majority in a way he didn't have for the first 4 years.
Kyle Cheney, thanks for coming on with us, man. It's going to get pretty ugly.
Yeah, I think pretty quickly too.
Indeed.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.